Hey y'all, today's video is perfect for the designers who are new to draping. I'm going to show you how you can add this simple draping technique to your next blazer, so let's get started. So first thing that we're always going to do is start off with a base. You want to make sure the side seams have not been connected, nor has the lining been connected either. Now, I'm going to take my fabric, I'm using taffeta, and I'm just going to fold over my taffeta. And then I'm going to make my first placement. Now, I know I want this drape to start at the shoulder, so I'm going to make my first placement at that top corner, and I wanted to basically swoop underneath the lapel. So that's where I'm going to make my second placement. Now, once you are sure how you want the top edge of your drape to lay, now we could go in and start adding our pleats. Now, we're going to be adding larger pleats that are about 1.25 inches, maybe even 1.5 inches wide towards the shoulder, and we're going to be making smaller pleats that are maybe 1/2 inch to 1 inch wide towards the bottom. And we're going to keep adding those until we get to a look that we are really satisfied with. I always like to give myself the freedom to just play around with this part because this is like the most important part of the drape. So once you figure that out, then we can go ahead and go to the next step. I think at this point I was almost done, but once you figure that out, now we can go ahead and start removing that extra fabric. So that corner that we folded over earlier, we're going to try and remove as much of that as possible. So I'm going to start by cutting that out. I also cut that top layer as well. And you want to make sure when you're cutting your drape, you're cutting this fabric, you want to give yourself enough space or enough room. In case you decide to add any extra detail, you want to give yourself enough space until you're definitely 100% positive that what you have is exactly how you want the drape to stay. So once you get to that point, as you can see in the video, I finally reached that point. You could go ahead and remove that extra fabric. You want to leave a few inches of space though still to fold your drape under, so that way you can have a nice clean finished edge. And so as you can see, now I'm folding this under, I want to say about probably like 1 inch or 1.5 inches. Yeah, about 1.5 inches. Doing this allows me to have an idea of what my finished edge will look like. So now that I see what my drape will look like, I'm satisfied with it. Now we can go on to the next part, which is cutting the extra fabric around the armhole because I want to be able to attach this to the armhole. So I'm giving myself extra space up here as well. So as you can see, I'm leaving about an extra 4, maybe even 5 inches of space around the shoulder. And then once you get all of that extra fabric cut out, then we could go to the next part. Hey y'all, I know you're enjoying this tutorial and we're about to get right back into the video, but I wanted to take a moment to personally invite you to my couture draping course. I designed this course for the designers who already have a great foundation. You know how to cut, you know how to sew, you know how to create, but you are ready to take your designs to the next level and actually start creating some couture garments. You want to be able to create the things with volume and structure and all these different things. Now, in this course, we have different types of projects available. We have some that will show you how to drape a garment from start to finish, and then we also have some that are going to just focus on the techniques only. That way you can really get a good mix of everything you need. Normally, enrollment is $500, but if you're watching this video, you will be able to get this course for a discount. So at checkout, enter the code ESC tutorial, and you'll be able to get this course for $350. And yes, we have payment plans available too. So if you're serious about becoming a better designer, you want to grow your craft, you want to see your skills improve, and you want to get results like my students who've been able to create garments like this just from being in my program for a matter of weeks, then go ahead, click the link in the description, and I can't wait to see what you create. Now, let's get back to the video. So now we are at a part that is super important. We're going to go ahead and take our chalk and we're going to mark where we have all our pleats placed because we are about to do something that I like to call thinning out your drape. Now, this is something that I do most of the time, not all of the time, but it is extremely helpful because it makes sewing your drape a lot easier basically. And so what I'm doing, or the best way to even explain this, is all you're doing is removing the fabric that can't be seen from the front side or the outside of your drape. And so any fabric that's in the seams essentially, or that's going through the seams, I am just cutting that down a little bit. Another way it can be explained is like this. when we created this drape, we created a bunch of folds, which ended up adding more thickness to our drape, or especially the seams. So what we're doing is we're going in and we're just cutting a little bit of those folds, so that way when we sew over our seam, it's not as thick. Here's a closer look. I know the fabric is still kind of in the way, but here's a closer look of what that looks like. And I'm really just cutting deep enough into the pleat to go into the seam allowance. You don't want to cut too deep into the drape, because otherwise it may start to create holes that are visible, and that's not what we want. But once that's done, now we can go ahead and sew this in place, and then we'll be able to cut off any remaining fabric. Now, when you're sewing this part is pretty self-explanatory. You just want to go ahead and do one long basting stitch. I like to sew right along the edge of my garment, or in this case, my armhole. And then once I sew that in, or sew the drape fully down, then I'll go ahead, I'll take my scissors and I'll cut right along the edge of that armhole. Now, typically, I do not cut all of the drape off. I like to leave a little bit extra just in case things need to be shifted later. But because this drape is so small and only takes up a tiny fraction of the garment, then in this case, it's fine. So now let's go into the next part, which is essentially doing the same thing, but this time we're doing it for the bottom. It doesn't need to be thinned out as much because our pleats were much smaller, but I'm still getting anything out of the way that I feel like could end up creating unnecessary bulk later on, especially because I do plan to go in and add some buttonholes here later, so I want to make sure that's easy for me. But once we do that, now let's go ahead and cut off the fabric again, and then we can move to our next part, which will be sewing the side seams of our drape. Also, make sure you leave that basting stitch in your drape once you sew the side seam, just in case you need to do alterations later. That last video just gave a quick look of what the side seam looked like, but now let's move on to the final part of the drape. And so how I want to do this now, in the video, I ended up doing it the opposite way, so I'm going to explain the correct way for y'all to do it. But I'm starting off by folding pleats into the shoulder. You want to make sure your pleats are going the same direction as the pleats on your drape. I ended up folding mine the opposite way and ended up redoing it later. But once you put pleats throughout the entire shoulder, I started from, I want to say, a few inches past that shoulder seam, and I came down maybe a few inches past where our drape starts. You want to go ahead and hand sew not the drape to the garment, but just hand sew the pleats in place, and then cut any extra fabric that may be there. After that, you can actually go ahead and remove the drape and then sew that part to the top of the shoulder. This is what it should look like. Don't mind that white thread. That is from my base stitch. I did it a little too far out, and that'll end up getting removed. But now we could add our sleeve, and this is what you should have. So the last part of this tutorial, or I guess second to last part, would basically be adding the draping detail into this big piece of fabric that we have. So I want this drape to flow with what we have already started across the body. So I'm essentially just creating layers. I took a large piece of fabric and just shifted or not even a large piece, but a large section of our fabric, and I shifted the whole entire thing upwards. And now I'm just going in between our fabric and creating layers and making it look like it connects to our drape. So this part is more so of a freestyle. I'm playing around with it. This is something that you may want to just watch. Even if you want to slow the video down to see how I did parts of it, you can, but we're just going in and adding pins to hold the shape of our layers. And then once I'm satisfied with that, I can go in and start cutting the extra fabric. Now, for the edge of our drape, at least the edge of the part that goes around the arm, I'm basically folding under our drape to see how the finished edge will look and how much fabric that finished edge needs. And once I figure that out, then I go and cut the extra fabric off. I want this drape to carry over into the front of the drape, so I'm also placing that as well. Now that that's all placed, the last thing I want to do is make sure the back of this has a really clean finish as well. So I'm opening up our side back seam, and I'm going to put the end of this drape inside of that side back seam. That way it can look really pretty, really nice, and really neat. So when I take it off the mannequin, you'll be able to see what that looks like. Here is a closer up view of what it looks like on the inside, and we're going to end up cutting this fabric down, but this is what it should look like before we start sewing. And so now that way our drape can have a really nice, clean, and smooth finish. Now, once that's done, we're going to do the last part of the drape, which is honestly one of the simplest parts, which is hand sewing everything in place. So I like to say that anywhere that you have a pin, you need to hand sew that area down, because that means it is very important. Like, that pin is there for a reason. It needs to be there in order to help the drape hold its shape or structure or design that you're creating. So you want to go in and basically just hand sew any place that you see a pin. You're going to do a little tack. Also, it's super important to mention that you don't need to do long stitches for this either. Like I said, small tacks is all you need, but this is how it looks completed. And that concludes our tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this simple tutorial. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye, y'all.